The woman at the front of the boardroom was not having a good morning, and she had decided, quite firmly, that everyone else in the building should know about it. Audrey Sinclair saw her the moment she stepped off the elevator on the 14th floor of Langford and Associates, 2 cups of coffee balanced in her hands and a folder tucked under her arm, with the precision of someone who had learned very early that carrying things properly was the difference between looking competent and looking chaotic. The woman, tailored blazer, coral lipstick, the particular posture of someone accustomed to being right, was standing at the glass reception desk with her arms crossed, and her voice raised just enough to carry without technically being considered shouting. "I asked for the Meridian file to be pulled before 9, the woman was saying to a young man named Jonah, who had been with the firm for 6 weeks and was currently holding a stack of manila envelopes with the expression of someone hoping the floor might open and swallow him whole. "I don't see it. I don't see it anywhere. Do you understand what it means when I say before 9? Jonah opened his mouth, closed it, tried again. Audrey set the coffees down on the side credenza, straightened her lanyard, and walked over with the same energy she used to approach a printer jam. Calm, targeted, no wasted movement. "Good morning." She stepped up beside Jonah and said it directly to the woman, not in a challenging way, not with the enthusiasm of someone performing friendliness. She said it the way you say it when you mean it and nothing more. "I'm Audrey Sinclair, Senior Document Coordinator. Can I help find what you're looking for?" The woman looked at her the way certain people look at others in lanyards, briefly, assessingly, with a half-second decision being made about whether the person in front of her was worth the full version of her attention. "The Meridian Acquisition File. It was supposed to be compiled and ready for a 9 o'clock review. It's 9:12. Audrey turned to the internal system on the desk tablet, pulled up the request log, and found the file in 11 seconds. It had been compiled. It had been sent to the wrong internal mailbox. 1 digit off in the extension code, the kind of thing that happened 3 times a week in a firm with 200 people and a document routing system that had been updated 4 times in 3 years and still remembered the old protocols better than the new ones. "The file was misdirected at routing," Audrey said. "The error isn't in this department." She looked up from the screen. "I can have it reprinted and in your hands in 4 minutes, or I can redirect the digital version to your access profile right now. Whichever is faster for you." The woman stared at her for 2 full seconds. "Digital," she said. "Profile Whitmore 7. Audrey made the redirect. The woman's tablet chimed. The woman looked at it, looked at Audrey, said nothing further, and walked back toward the conference rooms with the stride of someone who had won something even though she hadn't. Jonah exhaled next to her like a deflating balloon. "How do you do that?" Audrey handed him the manila envelopes he was still clutching. "Reroute the Meridian file confirmation to Whitmore's assistant so she has the paper trail, and fix the routing extension for that mailbox before lunch." Jonah nodded. Then, "Who is she anyway?" Audrey picked up her coffees from the credenza. "No idea," she said honestly, "but she'll be back if we don't fix the mailbox." She didn't find out until 40 minutes later, when she was in the document archive on the 6th floor, cross-referencing file numbers with a set of acquisition contracts that had been misfiled under the wrong year. She found out because her colleague Priya, who had worked at Langford for 9 years and considered herself the firm's unofficial historian, appeared in the doorway with the expression of someone carrying information she considered extremely relevant. "Audrey. The woman you helped this morning. What about her?" Priya tilted her head toward the lobby. "That's Charlotte Whitmore. She runs Whitmore Capital, the firm's biggest client group." She walked over and lowered her voice in the way that people do when they're not actually worried about being overheard, but the information feels like it deserves a lower voice. "And the man she came in with, the one in the gray suit who went straight upstairs, that's her son. Callum. No, wait, that's not right." She paused. "He's been in and out of meetings with the senior partners for 2 weeks. Something about a restructuring of the account management." Audrey looked up from the contracts. "What's his name?" Priya frowned. "I've heard 2 different names from 2 different assistants." She shrugged. "Asked Jonah. He checked him in." Audrey went back to her contracts. She filed the last 3, noted the correction on the misfiling record, and didn't think about the man in the gray suit again for the rest of the morning. The second time she heard his name, it came from the elevator. She stepped in on the 6th floor, carrying a box of archived files back to the 14th, and a man stepped in 14 seconds later from the lobby level, pressing 14 without looking up from his phone. He was tall in the way that's useful in airports and nowhere else. Dark suit, no tie, the kind of posture that doesn't announce itself. He wasn't looking at her, she wasn't looking at him. Then he looked up, and the elevator had already closed. He put his phone in his pocket. He stared at the panel for a moment the way people do when they realize they've stepped into a space and should probably acknowledge the other person in it. "You were the one who sorted the Meridian routing this morning," he said. It wasn't a question. Audrey looked at him sideways. "Yes. My mother spent 20 minutes convinced it was a departmental failure." He said this without inflection, just as information. "I checked the log after. It was 1 digit. It usually is," Audrey said. He looked at the box she was holding. "Want me to take that?" "No," she said. "I've got it." He didn't insist. She noted that. The elevator opened at 14. She stepped out first. He followed, slower, toward the senior partner suite on the other side of the floor. He stopped at the junction of the hallway. "Ethan Whitmore," he said. "Audrey Sinclair." She kept walking. He should find the partner's suite without much difficulty. It had a sign. She found out from Priya that evening, because Priya always stayed late on Tuesdays for reasons she described as unrelated to the receptionist on the night shift, that Ethan Whitmore was 39, that he ran Whitmore Capital alongside his mother, and that the restructuring the firm had been discussing for 2 weeks involved reorganizing how Langford managed the Whitmore account internally. Which meant, Priya said, lowering her voice again in that way she had, that someone from their side was going to be embedded with someone from our side for the next 3 months. Audrey looked up from her desk. "What does embedded mean in this context?" Priya shrugged. "Joint team, daily coordination, probably documents." Audrey looked at her computer screen, then back at Priya. "I hope they assign someone with a good router profile extension." Priya gave her the look that meant she thought Audrey was being deliberately obtuse and left. The joint coordination started on a Wednesday, which in Audrey's experience was the worst possible day to start anything, because Wednesday had the energy of a day that hadn't decided whether it belonged to the first half of the week or the second. The assigned coordinator from Langford was, through a combination of seniority and the fact that 2 other people had scheduling conflicts, Audrey. She found this out via a calendar invite sent at 8:47 in the morning from an address she didn't recognize. Subject line: Whitmore Langford File Integration, 9 a.m., Room 4. She arrived at 8:59. He was already in the room. He had coffee, not from the office kitchen, from somewhere outside, a paper cup with a lid, and a laptop open to what appeared to be a document structure map. "Good morning," she said. "Good morning." He looked up. "Did you get the preliminary file index I sent last night?" She had. She'd read it at 10:30 p.m. when it came through, because she had a habit of checking messages before bed that she had tried to break twice. "I have notes." He gestured to the seat across from him. They worked for 2 hours and 17 minutes. Audrey had expected a restructuring conversation, which usually meant someone from client side, explaining how things should ideally work while someone from firm side nodded, and then implemented something slightly different. Instead, Ethan opened the document structure, showed her what Whitmore Capital needed in terms of access, retrieval speed, and version control, and then asked her what the firm's system could actually deliver. Nobody ever asked that. They usually just stated requirements. "What's the realistic turnaround on a Tier 2 file pull?" he asked. Not the policy answer, the real one. Audrey looked at the map. 40 minutes if the routing's clean. Double that if it's been archived post-system update, because the migration left gaps in the cross-reference index. He wrote something. "That's useful." Can the gaps be fixed? Some of them. Not all. The original indexing was inconsistent at entry point, so backfilling is only as good as the original data. He nodded. "Who would you talk to about the ones that can be fixed?" she told him. He wrote it down. She noticed he didn't say he'd handle it himself or that he'd ask one of the partners. He wrote down her answer, like it was usable information, not a detail to be handed off. The session ended at 11:15. He stood up, capped his pen, said "See you Thursday," and left. Audrey sat in the empty room for a moment longer than necessary, and then went back to the 6th floor, where she had 3 contracts to cross-reference and a routing correction to verify. It was on Friday that she heard it. She was coming out of the copy room on the 14th floor with a set of printed amendments, and she had stopped to check the page count in the hallway. Quiet, no one around, the kind of mid-afternoon lull in an office building where the only sounds are the ventilation system and someone's distant phone call. The door to the small break room was slightly ajar, and she heard 2 voices she didn't recognize immediately. The first voice was male. Younger than Ethan's. Easy, the way voices are when the person speaking has never had to be careful in a room. "She's good," he was saying. "I'll give her that. But she's not exactly the profile you usually go for." "Profile?" The second voice laughed. "Quiet. Controlled, I mean. A document coordinator. Come on," the first voice again. "I'll take that bet. $50 says she figures out who she's dealing with and changes her entire approach by next week. They always do." A pause. Audrey stood very still in the hallway with her 17 pages, and the second voice, "I'll take the other side. 100 says she doesn't." She told Charlotte Whitmore to pick a format and walked away. "That's not someone who adjusts." Another pause, the sound of a coffee maker. "Either way," the first voice said, "it's an interesting variable for the next 3 months." Audrey checked her page count, all 17. She walked back to the document station, filed the amendments, and spent the rest of the afternoon with the word variable sitting at the back of her mind the way a splinter sits. Small, specific, impossible to fully ignore. She didn't tell Priya. She didn't tell Jonah. She went home, made dinner, and sat at her kitchen table in her apartment near Kensington Market with the city making its usual noise outside, and the word variable taking up more space than she'd allotted it. The question wasn't who had said it. The question was what exactly they had bet. That was the word that didn't leave her. Bet. Not joke, not observation. Bet. Meaning there were stakes, meaning someone expected something specific to happen, meaning she had been discussed with enough detail that her behavior could be wagered on. She slept 5 hours. She made very good coffee the next morning. She arrived at the office 8 minutes earlier than usual. The following Tuesday's session went the same as the first, except that at the end of it, Ethan closed his laptop and said, without particular setup, "There are 2 gaps in the cross-reference index that the IT team says can be patched. I cited your assessment. They confirmed it." She looked at him. "You quoted me to the IT team?" "I quoted the assessment." He shrugged slightly. It was accurate. Audrey considered that for a moment. Does the IT team know the patch will only work if the original entry data is clean? No. He looked at the table. That's why I'm telling you now instead of after they've done it. She told him what they'd need to do at entry point first. He wrote it down again. She noticed again that he wrote things down. A lot of people in client-facing roles recorded things digitally and then never looked at them. He used a notebook with blue ink and a specific shorthand she'd started to be able to partially read. That evening, Priya caught her at the elevator. "The younger Whitmore associate," she said. "His name is Lachlan. He's been here twice this week." Audrey waited. "He asked the reception desk about you, specifically." "What did he ask?" Priya tilted her head. "Whether you'd been with the firm long. Whether you handled many client-facing integration projects." Priya paused. "Whether you and the senior coordinator ever covered the same files." Audrey pressed the elevator button. "That's a lot of questions about file logistics." Priya looked at her steadily. "It wasn't about the files, Audrey." The elevator opened. Audrey stepped in. She didn't reroute her behavior. She didn't start arriving earlier, or dressing differently, or bringing better coffee, or softening the way she responded when something was wrong. She did what she had always done, which was to show up and do the work correctly, because she had learned a long time ago, in a smaller city, in a smaller firm, before she moved to Toronto, that changing yourself for an audience meant the audience had already won something at your expense. What she did do, quietly, was pay closer attention. She noticed that in their Tuesday and Thursday sessions, Ethan arrived with questions he had already worked through partially, not expecting her to answer for him, but checking his assumptions against her information. She noticed that he didn't speak over her. She noticed that when she corrected something, he didn't get tight around the mouth the way some people do when they're quietly offended by being corrected, which was telling. She noticed that he never mentioned Lachlan. The third time she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear was not in a hallway. It was in the document archive on the 6th floor, where she was working late on a Thursday evening, and where, apparently, Lachlan Reese, she had looked up the name, one of the Whitmore Capital junior associates, had assumed no one would be. He was on the phone in the far aisle, voice low, shoes audible on the archive floor. "She's still exactly the same," he was saying, "not performing at all." She told Ethan the IT patch had a prerequisite issue before they'd even started, like she flagged it before he could look good for flagging it. A voice on the other end, too quiet to make out. Lachlan again. "I know, the bet's looking bad for me," he laughed. "She hasn't adjusted 1 degree. A pause. "I don't know." He stopped. A longer pause. "He's paying attention to her differently than I've seen him pay attention to anyone in a work context. Which is either fine or complicated depending on how you look at it." Audrey stood very still between 2 shelving units with a manila folder in each hand. The person on the phone said something. "Lachlan, I know what the restructuring is actually about. And if she figures it out," he paused again, "she'll walk. You know she'll walk." Audrey waited until his footsteps moved toward the elevator and the door clicked shut before she set the folders down on the nearest shelf and stood there in the fluorescent quiet of the archive, looking at nothing in particular. What the restructuring is actually about. She had the file index. She had the document structure map. She had 3 months of session notes. What she did not have was the context that apparently existed above her access level. The reason a senior partner had called 2 other coordinators off this project before assigning it to her. The reason Ethan Whitmore had asked specifically about realistic timelines and realistic gaps rather than ideal outcomes. The reason Lachlan was watching her with the specific attention of someone monitoring an experiment. She took the elevator to the 14th floor. It was 6:40 in the evening. Most of the floor was empty. The light in room 4 was on. She knocked once on the open door. Ethan was still there, the same notebook, a different pen. He looked up. Audrey. She stepped in, she closed the door, she stood at the edge of the table and looked at him with the same directness she used for everything. I overheard a conversation this evening that I wasn't meant to hear. I'm not going to pretend I didn't, and I'm not going to perform surprise that it happened. She put her hands flat on the edge of the table. What is this restructuring actually about? He set his pen down. He didn't look away, which she noted. You're asking because of something, Lachlan said. I'm asking because I have been doing this work for 3 months in good faith and apparently there is context I don't have. She paused. I'd rather hear it from you. Ethan looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked back up. The short version is that Whitmore Capital is considering acquiring a partial stake in Langford, not the firm itself, the document management division, which is the division you work in. Audrey stood very still. The reason I'm the one doing the assessment is because my mother felt the previous due diligence was too internal. She wanted someone who would look at how it actually functioned rather than how the partners presented it. He met her eyes. You have been, without knowing it, part of an operational audit. She let that settle. How long have you known? Since before the elevator, he said. She could see he had already decided to be honest about this, which made it simultaneously better and worse. You could have told me. Yes, he didn't qualify that. Just, yes, and the bet, she said. The one Lachlan made. He looked at her steadily. He made it with one of our junior analysts. The original wager was that you would alter your behavior once you understood the environment you were in. He kept his voice even. He thought most people would. And the other side, that you wouldn't. Audrey looked at the window. Toronto at 6:45 in the evening, the city doing what it always did. Moving, indifferent, enormous. She had come from a smaller place and had spent 4 years in this firm building a reputation that had apparently become detailed enough for strangers to bet on. She wasn't sure how she felt about that. She knew how she felt about the audit. You were assessing my division without telling anyone in my division. We were assessing the division's infrastructure, he paused. You weren't under personal evaluation. She looked back at him. The gap between those two things is narrower than you think. He didn't argue. She noted that too. Is the assessment complete? She no. He picked up his pen, set it back down. We have 6 more weeks. That depends on the assessment. He hesitated just once before continuing. And on other variables, she raised an eyebrow. He looked directly at her. That wasn't a reference to Lachlan's bet. He said it with enough precision that she believed him. That was a reference to the fact that the firm's acquisition interest and my personal judgment have started to feel less like the same thing. Audrey picked up her bag from the chair she hadn't sat in. You should have told me at the start, she said. Yes, I need to think, she said, not about the audit, about whether I can keep doing this now that I know what it is. He nodded. That's fair. She walked to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame. The IT patch, the entry point prerequisite, I flagged. Has anyone followed up on it? No, he said. Not yet. She turned back halfway. Tell them to start with fiscal year 2020. That's where the original data was dirtiest, and she left. The walk to the subway took 12 minutes, and she spent all of them not thinking clearly, which meant she was thinking about several things at once in the way that pretends to be disorder but is actually just processing. She thought about the word audit. She thought about Lachlan's voice in the archive. She thought about the way Ethan had said personal judgment, careful and exact, like someone who chose words the way some people chose tools, for what they could actually do, not for how they looked. She thought about the file index she had built over 3 months, the gap corrections she had flagged, the routing errors she had fixed. All of it clean, all of it accurate. All of it, apparently, being measured by someone she hadn't known was measuring. She got on the train, she sat down. She looked at her own reflection in the dark window across from her. The thing about finding out you're being watched is that it changes you or it doesn't, and the version of yourself that doesn't change is the one you can actually live with afterward. She made her decision somewhere between Spadina and Bloor. She came in the next morning and worked her shift exactly as she always had, because there was nothing different to do. The work was the work. The routing corrections were real. The misfilled contracts were actually misfiled. None of that had changed. What had changed was that she made 2 phone calls before 9. The first was to the IT department, to confirm that the entry point prerequisite for the cross-reference patch was being addressed for fiscal year 2020 as she had recommended. It was not. She provided the technical specifications again. She sent a follow-up email with her name on it in the CC line. The second call was to her own manager, who she asked to meet at 11. At 11, she sat in her manager's office. Karen Ashbridge, who had been with Langford for 16 years and had the particular quality of someone who had seen everything and was therefore not surprised by any of it, and she said, calmly, that she had become aware that the Whitmore-Langford integration involved a potential acquisition of the document management division, and that she thought the division's coordinator should have been informed. Karen looked at her for a moment. "You found out," she said. "I overheard something I wasn't intended to." Audrey kept her voice level. "I confirmed it directly." Karen leaned back. "And now? I'd like to know what it means for the team, specifically the ones who don't know yet." Karen studied her. "You're not asking about yourself. I'm asking about the process." Audrey paused. "I'll sort out myself." Karen was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up her phone and made a call that apparently bypassed several levels of management, because within 20 minutes, 2 senior partners had been added to a calendar invite that hadn't existed at 9 that morning. The meeting took place at 1. It included the senior partners, Karen, Audrey, Charlotte Whitmore, and Ethan. It did not include Lachlan, who was apparently at a client lunch, and who, based on his expression when he returned at 2:30 and found the meeting notes waiting in his inbox, had not expected any of the morning's events. The meeting was not comfortable. Charlotte Whitmore, to her credit, was the first to say that the internal communication process had been poorly managed. She said it in the tone of someone stating a fact that she intended to rectify, not apologize for at length. The senior partners were less direct, which in Audrey's experience meant they were more uncomfortable, which she filed away as information. Ethan said very little. When the partners had finished their version of events and Karen had asked her straightforward questions, and Charlotte had said what she intended to do going forward, Ethan looked across the table at Audrey. "You came in this morning and worked your shift before doing any of this," he said. He wasn't asking. The work still needed doing, she said. Something in his expression shifted slightly, the same way it had in the elevator on the first day, that minor recalibration. The meeting ended. The partners filed out. Karen gave Audrey a look on her way past that communicated several things that would never appear in a performance review. Charlotte stopped at the door. "Miss Sinclair," she said. Audrey looked up. "The routing correction you made on my first morning." Charlotte held her gaze. "I'm aware it was faster than I suggested it would be. I had the file pulled up before you finished explaining the problem," Audrey said. "Habit." Charlotte nodded once, precisely. "Good habit," she said, and left. Ethan was still at the table. They were briefly alone in the room, which seemed less like intention and more like the natural result of 2 people who weren't rushing toward the exit. "The IT patch has been initiated," he said. "Entry point corrections starting with 2020. "Good," she said. He looked at his notebook, then at her. "I should have told you from the beginning. I said that before. I want to say it again, because once wasn't enough." Audrey sat with that. Once had been enough as an apology. The second time had a different quality. Not performance, not managing her reaction. It was the version of saying something that you say when you mean it to be heard. She picked up her begging. She stood. "I know why you didn't," she said. "It wasn't personal." He looked at her. "Some of my reasons for not telling you were." He paused. "That's not an excuse, but it's the honest version." She stood at the door. "Why does Lachlan know what the restructuring is actually about and the person running the operational audit doesn't?" He looked down at the table. "Because I told him before I realized I should have been protecting you from the dynamics of it." He looked back up. "That's a failure of judgment on my part. What was the bet originally worth?" He smiled, just slightly. $50. "Who took which side?" he told her. She absorbed that. She looked at the window. Then she said, "The cross-reference patch is going to take longer than they've quoted. There are 14 more entry points that need manual review before the software can run cleanly." "How do you know?" "Because I reviewed them last night after I got home." She looked at him steadily. "I was going to tell you at Thursday's session, but I'm telling you now." He stood up slowly. He picked up his notebook. He held it in his hands for a moment. That information would have taken the IT team an additional 2 weeks to find. "Yes. And you spent last night finding it. While you were deciding whether to stay on the project. The work still needed doing," she said again. He looked at her with that same direct attention he had used since the elevator. Not the kind that asks questions. The kind that already has the answer and is just confirming the shape of it. "Can I buy you coffee?" he said. Not in the building. There's a place 3 blocks over that's bad in a tolerable way. I have something to tell you that I should have said a long time ago, and I'd rather not say it in this room. Audrey looked at the table at the window at the door. Is this about the acquisition? She asked. No, he said, it's not. She put her bag on her shoulder. Lead the way, she said. The coffee was indeed not good. The chairs were mismatched, and the table nearest the window was slightly uneven, and nobody in the place seemed to notice or care who either of them were, which in Audrey's experience was the clearest indicator of a useful location. He ordered 2 coffees without asking. She let it go because she did want one. He held his cup without drinking it for a moment. Then he said straightforwardly, when I requested that the file coordinator be assigned to this project, I requested you specifically. He looked at her. I had read the routing correction you'd flagged 2 months before the integration started. It was in an internal report Karen Ashbridge submitted to the partners. I noted it. When the project came up, I asked for you. She looked at her coffee. I didn't tell you because I couldn't figure out how to tell you without it sounding like something it wasn't, except that it is. He paused. That's not clear. I know that's not clear. You requested me because of a routing note in an internal report, because the note was accurate and efficient and exactly what that kind of assessment should say, and because in 16 months of reading Langford's internal communications, I had not seen that kind of precision from anyone in document coordination. He looked at her. I requested you because I wanted to see if the report matched the person. It did. He looked at his cup considerably. Audrey sat with that for a reasonable length of time. You're telling me this now. Because I should have told you weeks ago, and I kept finding reasons not to that were more about my own uncertainty than your right to know. She looked out the window at the street. The city was doing its usual afternoon thing. People with coffee, people on phones, a streetcar going by with the particular sound Toronto streetcars make that she had spent 2 years finding annoying and now found almost comforting. The acquisition, she said. Does it go through regardless of the assessment? No. He was direct. My recommendation carries weight. Charlotte's does too. If the infrastructure isn't sound, we don't move forward. And if it is sound, then we make an offer and the partners decide whether to accept it. What happens to the team if they accept? He met her eyes. It becomes a division of Whitmore Capital with operational independence. Same people, better infrastructure budget. He paused. Probably better routing systems. She looked at her coffee cup. And you'd be the one managing the acquisition integration, she said. Yes. She looked up. Is that why you wanted to work with someone who didn't adjust? He was quiet for a moment. That's part of it, he said. The other part is less professional, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Audrey looked at the table. She thought about the archive on Thursday evening and Lachlan's voice saying, she'll walk if she finds out. She thought about the fluorescent quiet and the folders in her hands and the decision she'd made on the subway between Spadina and Bloor. She hadn't walked. I have 14 entry point corrections that need to be done before the software audit can run clean, she said. I know. I can have them done in a week if I get access to the legacy data from the migration. He looked at her steadily. I can get you that access by tomorrow morning. Then that's where we start, she said. He almost smiled. She was starting to be able to tell the difference between the versions. This one was the real kind. She finished her coffee. He finished his. The chair wobbled slightly when she stood up. The streetcar outside went by again, or possibly a different one. The afternoon was moving forward the way afternoons do in cities, without asking, without pausing, indifferent to what had just been said at a slightly uneven table in a place with mediocre coffee. They walked back toward the building 3 blocks over. At the corner, Ethan stopped to hold the door of a bike share station for an elderly man who hadn't asked for help but accepted it without breaking stride. Audrey noted that too. She had been noting things for 2 months and had a fairly complete picture by now. The acquisition assessment, she said as they waited for the light. Yes, when you write your recommendation. She looked at the signal. Write what you actually found, not what makes the deal easier. He looked at her sideways. I always do. Good, she said. Then we'll be fine. The light changed. They crossed. On the other side of the street, 2 floors up in the Whitmore Capital temporary office space that Lachlan had been using for the past month, Lachlan Reese stood at the window with a coffee he had stopped tasting 20 minutes ago, watching the 2 of them cross Simcoe Street with the particular expression of someone who has just conclusively lost a bet he had expected to win. He took out his phone. He typed a message to the junior analyst on the other side of the wager. She stayed exactly herself. Pay up. The reply came back in under a minute. Already transferred. Worth it. Lachlan looked back out the window. He had to admit, looking at it objectively, that he'd also had the wrong read on Ethan. which was rarer and more interesting, and the kind of thing you filed away for later. He finished his coffee. He went back to his desk. He had a report to write and a bet to settle, and if he was honest with himself, a grudging amount of respect to figure out what to do with. The 14 entry corrections took 6 days. Audrey sent the final one at 9:20 on a Tuesday morning, copied to Ethan, the IT team lead, and Karen Ashbridge, with a summary document that took her 40 minutes to write and said in 3 pages what most people would have taken 12 to explain. The software audit ran clean 2 hours later. Karen stopped by her desk in the afternoon. She stood there for a moment, looking at the summary document on Audrey's screen. "You know this is going in your file." Audrey looked up. "Is that good or bad?" Karen looked at her with the expression of someone who had been with the firm for 16 years and had watched many things happen. "That depends entirely on what Whitmore Capital decides to do with it." She walked away before Audrey could ask the follow-up. 3 weeks later, Ethan's recommendation was submitted to the senior partners. Audrey knew this because the calendar shifted, because Karen was in 2 additional partner meetings that week, and because Lachlan, who had become, through proximity and the particular chemistry of people who have watched each other navigate something difficult, approximately collegial, told her over the bad coffee at the place 3 blocks over that the report had gone in and that it was favorable. "What does favorable mean?" she asked. Lachlan wrapped both hands around his cup. "It means he described the infrastructure accurately, including the gaps and what it took to fix them. He looked out the window, and he described the team accurately. He glanced at her sideways, including one person specifically." Audrey looked at him steadily. He lifted his hands briefly from the cup. "I lost the bet. I'm not going to pretend I didn't." She looked at her coffee. "I know. For what it's worth," he said. "I think I had the wrong frame for what I was measuring." She looked up. "I was measuring whether you'd perform for the environment," he said. He looked slightly uncomfortable, which in Audrey's observation was a new look for him and sat better on his face than the easy confidence. "That was the wrong thing to measure. What I was actually watching was whether the environment would perform for you." He paused. "It didn't, and you didn't leave." She held her cup. And I think that's the thing that Ethan wrote into the recommendation." He said this carefully, not the routing corrections, not the patch. The fact that when the situation became genuinely difficult, you stayed exactly yourself and fixed the problem anyway. Audrey looked out the window. The street was doing its usual thing, unhurried, enormous, entirely unconcerned. She thought about the archive floor, about the subway, about a decision made in the 3 minutes between 2 stations on a line she had taken 100 times. She went back to work. The acquisition offer came in on a Thursday morning, in the form of a letter, actual paper, which Charlotte Whitmore apparently preferred for formal communications, addressed to the senior partners, with a copy filed to Karen, and a summary document that Audrey was not expected to see and saw anyway, because the summary document had been run through document coordination for formatting purposes, and routing being what it was, occasionally files arrived where they were going. She read it in the 3 minutes she had before she needed to reroute it. It was fair, more than fair. The operational independence clause was specific and real, not language that would dissolve on contact with implementation. The infrastructure budget was 3 times what the division currently received. There was a provision for staff retention that Karen had clearly negotiated at some point when Audrey wasn't paying attention. She rerouted the file. She went back to her desk. She thought about nothing in particular for a moment. Then she opened a new document, pulled up the routing log for the past 6 months, and started drafting the cross-reference correction report that nobody had asked for, and that the IT team was going to need if they wanted the next system update to go cleanly. She sent it to the IT team lead at 3:15. She CC'd Ethan. She didn't explain why. He replied at 3:42. "Just, thank you," she replied. "The entry point at 2022 has the same issue as 2020. I've flagged it in the report," he replied. I've already sent it to the team." She typed, "Good." She sat there for a moment, looking at the word "good" on her screen. Then she closed the chat window and went back to the routing log, which had 3 more months of data and 1 more correction she wanted to document before she lost the thread. The partners accepted the offer on a Tuesday. Audrey found out from Karen, who came to her desk at 4 in the afternoon, with the expression of someone who had processed the news already and was now delivering it with the specific neutrality of someone who understood it would land differently on different people. "We're signing the agreement Friday," Karen said. "Operational transition over 6 months. Nothing changes immediately." She looked at Audrey directly. "Your role expands, officially. There'll be a title and a budget and access to the legacy systems you've been working around for 2 years. Audrey looked at her screen. The routing log. 3 more months of data. Did the infrastructure report have anything to do with the terms? She asked. Karen's expression moved slightly. Which one? The cross-reference correction report. The one I sent to IT 3 weeks ago. Karen looked at her for a moment. Ethan Whitmore cited it in a supplementary note to the partners. She paused. The one he submitted after his original recommendation. She looked at the report on Audrey's screen. It demonstrated that you were still improving infrastructure that you had no formal obligation to improve, during a period when you knew the firm was under external evaluation. He said it was the most accurate picture of how the division actually functions. Audrey sat with that. I was going to send it regardless, she said. I know, Karen said. That's what the note said. Priya appeared from nowhere, as Priya tended to do on significant occasions, and stood at the edge of the desk with her arms crossed and the expression of someone who had known since Tuesday of 3 weeks ago and had been very patient about not saying so. Audrey looked at her. I knew since the elevator, Priya said simply. There was no elevator moment, Audrey said. There's always an elevator moment, Priya said. You just weren't watching yourself. She went back to her desk at the other end of the floor with the serenity of someone who has made their point and has no need to extend it. That evening, Audrey finished the routing log corrections and sent the final document to the archive at 6:55. She put on her coat. She picked up her bag. She took the elevator down to the lobby. Ethan was there. This was not, she realized, a coincidence. He had his coat on and was standing near the revolving doors with the look of someone who had made a decision earlier in the day and had been waiting for the right moment to act on it. He was holding 2 coffees from outside, the same paper cups with lids. She looked at the cups. The bad place 3 blocks over is closed on Tuesdays, he said. I got these from somewhere worse. That's dedication, she said. He handed her one. They stood in the lobby for a moment with the revolving door behind them, the street outside doing its evening thing, people and streetcars, and the city moving in that particular way it has at dusk when everything is illuminated, but nothing is quite finished. The board of the foundation, he said. The one Charlotte has been building for hospitality and design professionals. She's expanding it to include urban infrastructure and document systems. Audrey looked at her cup. That's a specific expansion. She looked at the correction report. She looked at the 6 months of routing logs. He looked out at the street. She wants someone on the board who understands how systems actually work, rather than how they're supposed to work. Audrey was quiet. It's not a condition of anything, he said. The acquisition is done. Your role expands regardless. This is a separate question. Who else is on the board? Charlotte, himself. 2 architects and a former municipal planner from Halifax. He paused, and Karen if she agrees, which she will. Audrey looked at the revolving door, at the street, at the city she had chosen 4 years ago for no particular reason, except that it was large enough that she could be exactly herself without it being remarkable. I'll need the terms in writing, she said. Of course, and I want to see the charter before I agree to anything. I'll have it to you by Thursday. She looked at him. The coffee was bad. She could tell already. It had the specific quality of coffee that had been sitting for 20 minutes and knew it. You should have told me at the beginning, she said, about the assessment, about requesting me for the project. Yes, I know why you didn't. She looked at her cup. The gap between what you were assessing and what you were paying attention to started to overlap and you didn't know what to do with that. He looked at her steadily. That's exactly right. It wasn't fair to me. No, it wasn't. She drank the bad coffee. He drank his. The revolving door turned behind them twice, someone leaving, someone arriving. The city continued to be exactly itself outside. I stayed exactly myself, she said, during all of it. I know, he said. That's the thing I wrote into the report. He paused. It's also the thing I've been trying to tell you since the elevator on the first day, except I couldn't find the right way to say it that wasn't also about the assessment. And now the assessment is done. Now it's done. She looked at the door. She looked at him. What exactly are you saying, Ethan? He looked at her directly, with the same attention he had used since the beginning. Not the kind that manages, not the kind that measures, the kind that actually sees. I'm saying that the report is submitted and the acquisition is signed, and there are no more structural reasons for me to be in this building, which means the only reason left is the honest one. She held her cup. The honest one, she said. Yes. She looked out at the street. At a woman walking by with a dog who hadn't decided whether it wanted to go left or right. At a streetcar going south. Toronto doing the thing it always did, which was to be enormous and matter-of-fact about it. She thought about the archive floor, about the decision she'd made in 3 minutes on the subway, about the routing log she had just filed, which nobody had asked for, and which was accurate because accurate was the only version she knew how to make. She finished her coffee. She dropped the cup in the recycling bin by the door with the small precision she used for everything. She looked at him. "The foundation charter by Thursday," she said. "By Thursday, and you're buying the coffee next time." Not from wherever that was. He almost smiled, the real kind. It changed his face exactly the way she had noticed it did, the first time she had seen it, in room 4, over a notebook with blue ink. "Deal," he said. She pushed through the revolving door into the evening air, which was cold in the particular way Canadian autumn is cold, clear and direct and not apologizing for itself. She turned up her collar. Behind her, the door turned again, and he fell into step beside her on the sidewalk without being asked, which she allowed, because some decisions don't need to be announced to count as decisions. The street ran east and west and north and south, as streets in Toronto do, in all directions at once, going somewhere. They walked.